mean, I am horrible with stress. It should make me feel better. And he said, well, we can't explain that. Well, interestingly, you know the enzyme I said that in the brain you have trouble making histamine into the histamine 2? That enzyme is a stress regulator. Now, normally, in the general population, when you're encountering stress, as you're living through life in this enzyme, it's up at the top. Think of it like a float in the toilet tank, right? When that floats at the top, you're cranking out the H2 and you're just going along fine. Histamine 2 is part of our alert, awake, arousal system. When you all of a sudden encounter acute stress, which the body is very good at dealing with acute stress, but it's not meant to deal with chronic stress, long-term stress. When you encounter acute stress, just the normal body, it makes what we call tribulin. Tribulin drops, that is just like flusher. It's just the flushing, and that float drops, right? And that enzyme drops down, and then that rapid drop in that enzyme activity stimulates what we call the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And it says, drops it down, and it says, oh, boost is up, and the HPA axis tells the adrenal glands, put out cortisol, and cortisol comes back and boosts that enzyme clear up to the top, like 3.5 times its activity. And boy, then you're really dealing with the stress. That's why we always get a little stressed and you just go, ooh, I'm energized, right? Okay, that's what it's doing. Now, and then the adrenal glands say, okay, we did our job. They sit back and they just pulsate a little bit every hour just to keep the cortisol, just, keep going until we know it's gone. Well, what happens is in an MS patient, we're short on that enzyme, so it's dropping, 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 and the adrenal glands will keep saying, oh, come on, they're putting out the cortisol. That's why MS patients have high cortisol levels. They have a hyper HPA axis, which interestingly, in that animal model, which I told you they said doesn't have anything to do with MS, the HPA axis in the animal model is hypoactive. Ours is hyperactive. Okay, so we have this hyperactive system trying to put out cortisol, trying to boost it up. Our cortisol levels are high, and we know what? We just can't do it. Then MS patients will say some stressor, some emotional stress, some physical stress, some infection, something, seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, you've got this going on where it's trying to boost up, and the adrenal glands saying, oh, we're doing all we can, trying to keep this afloat here. And then all of a sudden you get some stressor, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, in comes the tribulin, down goes the enzyme, and then consequently, what do you have? Your adrenal glands say, you know what, we gave you all we had, we give up. And you go into hypoadrenal function, and then your symptoms really start to take off. Now, interestingly, on that, with that enzyme, where it's supposed to come back and boost it all up, this is why when a person goes in early on in the disease, say they have an exacerbation, and they go in and they may even be paralyzed, just all of a sudden had a flare-up. They go into the doctor gives them an infusion of cortisone, Solumedrol. And they say, my gosh, I feel great, it may walk out. The cortisol, the Solumedrol, cortisone, just like cortisol, acts and boosts that way up to the top. And you do great. But as the disease progresses and that enzyme keeps dropping, and pretty soon the patients keep going back in for the Solumedrol, the cortisone treatments, they're going, it's not doing what it used to do, doc. It's not helping me. Why? Because when you get to a certain point, just like your own body's adrenal glands putting out the cortisol, they're saying, you know what? We're trying to boost it up, but there's too much deficiency. We can't make the difference. And that's why the Solumedrol treatments end up seeming to work in the beginning and losing their effect. The MS patients actually there's an imbalance in the immune system. We have what we call a hyper Th1 and an underactive Th2. Now, Th1 is your cell-mediated. In other words, it's your localized immune system. It's what happens right at the little individual cell. And the little individual cell, what normally would happen is it's got these little warning flags put in it. And those warning flags, if something happens to the cell, they break open and release the warning flags. The warning flags say, yoo-hoo, immune system, there's a problem here, and the immune system runs in macrophages. And macrophages come in, they're like little eating Pac-Man. They come in, and they clean up the debris, and if there's any problem, You know, they're checking, nope, everything looks like it belongs here. But if they found an invader, then they would have gone and told sent a signal to the immune system. The immune system would have brought in recruitments. They would have brought in, you know, what we call natural killer cells, like hand-to-hand combat. Show me the invader. I'll beat them up. And then T helper cells would have come in. The T helper cells would have said, oh, show me the bad guy. I'll take a mugshot of him. I'll send it to the B cells. The B cells will make antibodies. And we'll catch him and nab him if he ever shows his little ugly mug again. Okay? That's not happening. We just have a high Th1. That means the cells are breaking open. They're releasing these things. The macrophages are coming in, and they're looking for problems. But they're not seeing anything. They're just cleaning up debris. It's just like, hey, well, things are kind of falling apart here, but I don't see anything, anybody who caused it, you know. It's just a self-destruction. And so we have this hyper Th1 and low Th2, which is that antibody response. Well, we're not being told. Now, histamine 2 balances it. It settles these Th1s down. It says, hey, don't get overexcited here, you know, it's no big deal. And it helps to bring balance to the system, in which we have lost our balance. Which is exactly, you know, Dr. Behan, Professor Behan of the Netherlands, 2002, he published a study that showed exactly what I'm telling you. MS is not an autoimmune disease. MS is not an autoimmune disease.
Myth. MS is an autoimmune disease.
MS is not where the immune system is attacking the myelin. They took MR spectroscopy and they watched the myelin cells in the brain, the oligodendrocytes, and they watched them and found that they actually self-degenerated. You know, remember that house cleaning thing I was talking about? They self-degenerated up to 3 weeks before any immune cells even showed up to site. And the only thing that showed up were the macrophages. Oh, well, let's clean up the debris, you know. That's all that's happening. And that was brought to the MS Society's attention, and the MS Society came back and said, we need to study it further. Never heard another word about it. It got swept under the rug. The other thing that histamine 2 is also involved in is our digestive system. It makes us make the gastric acid, the digestive enzymes, the intrinsic factor. And we find that people with MS, they'll say, oh, you know, I can't eat anything but maybe some carbs, you know, nothing else settles. I eat a steak and it just sits there, won't go anywhere. And they complain about this esophageal reflux. Well, what happens is we don't make enough histamine 2, so we don't make enough gastric acid and digestive enzymes, so we have trouble digesting proteins and fats. And in fact, Dr. Swank, who had put people on a low-fat diet and low protein, he noticed that research shows that meat, in our stools, we had undigested meat fibers and fat globules. Well, we didn't have the things to break them down. And he didn't know that was lack of histamine 2. But this is also why, see, you got your esophagus goes down to your stomach, and there's this sphincter, this valve that opens and closes down there. And when you eat something, that valve's supposed to close. You're supposed to fill the stomach with gastric acid, and you're supposed to start churning it away, and then it's supposed to just little tiny pulsates, drop some of that into the intestine, and the intestine then raises to an alkaline environment, which activates all the enzymes, and away you go and you digest and eat, right? Well, we can't do that. We don't have enough digestive gastric acid. And so we're sitting there and we're churning and we're churning and we're churning, trying to mechanically break it down so we can send it on, and it can't. You know, other than simple, carbs and stuff, we have trouble with meats and, you know, those kind of things. And so it builds up pressure and it shoots the food back up through that opening to the esophagus, because that opening to the esophagus only closes if you have a lot of gastric acid, if you get that pH down there. If that pH remains a little bit elevated, that sphincter remains open, and so you shoot it back up. Well, even though you didn't have enough gastric acid, your esophagus is pretty much neutral at about 7. But you might have gastric acid now down to, it should be 1 to a 2 on a pH scale, but you're probably 4 or 5, you know, and so it's enough to cause a burn. So we get that esophageal burn, that reflux that happens.